Let's start with Arkansas. It's priced a little bit more. Arkansas, over under win total of 7 wins, minus 125 to the over, minus 105 to the under. The non conference slate: Cincinnati at home, Missouri State at BYU, and Liberty. I need to take a moment to celebrate Arkansas, which will be playing host to Bobby Petrino and Hugh Freeze at home. Just magnificent. I mean, you go to an Arkansas party, you can see literally anybody. South Carolina also going to be a home game at Missouri from the East. Then you get into the SEC West. We mentioned that neutral site game against Texas A&M in the Cowboys Stadium. That counts as a road game for the Razorbacks this year. They're also at Mississippi State, at Auburn. Home games in division play: Alabama, LSU, and Ole Miss, all coming to Fayetteville. 7 wins, round number, a team that is right in the middle of this division that, as we've already hinted and discussed, it is very tough to slide the pieces around. What are we doing?
I'm in the over, but I don't love it. I think they're probably 7-5. I think KJ Jefferson's one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the conference. They've built an offense around him. I do think the loss of Treylon Burks is pretty big, but I'm a believer in the culture that Sam Pittman has built. Like, I had them losing to Texas A&M earlier, but I do think their schedule, especially the non-con, is pretty easy. The BYU game's a little tricky, but I'm going to go over. But I think 7-5 is probably where they do finish.
Whoever wins the boot. I don't know what to do with Arkansas LSU, and they're both at 7. And so whoever wins that, like, what has anybody been close to that trophy? Because it looks like it, based on comparison from photo, that, the state of Louisiana and the state of Arkansas, and it's big. It's got to be about 4 feet tall total. I mean, as I was going through this, and I'm not trying to like spoil my LSU pick as well, but I kind of see them. I count them up as being a push, like a perfect 7-5. And if Arkansas can beat LSU, then I think that this can be a good overplay. Like, I don't have a strong read on this. I lean to the over only because I think that South Carolina and Missouri is a very manageable draw, even with Missouri being a rivalry game. I think that Arkansas will be favored against Cincinnati. I think at BYU is absolutely tricky, but it's a game that's winnable for the Razorbacks. So it is a strong push. I guess I lean over, but if they lose to LSU, then it's just going to settle at 7-5.
This pains me, but I have to go under. I just don't think this team is going to improve on last year. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I was doing a preview for this for an HQ last week, Danny, and you mentioned Treylon Burks. Like, Burks was roughly 40% of their offensive output last year. And his total on KJ Jefferson's passing yards was an even larger impact because of how many of those yards came after the catch. Like, there were a lot of very short throws to Treylon Burks where then he just took off like a freight train running through defenses and picking up a ton of yards afterwards. And I think the offense is still going to be good. I just don't know, when you have a focal point and they leave, there's questions for me about how you can replace that so quickly. I think the schedule, while they don't have a ton of road games, is difficult. Non-conference games against Cincinnati, a team that's not going to be as good as last year, but is still a team that could be the best group of 5 team in the country and was in the playoff last year. A road trip to BYU, a Liberty team that's going to give you problems offensively. I think you combine that with your SEC schedule, and there are just too many possible landmines that you could hit. And another thing that I look at too, like for teams like last year, the Razorbacks lost 4 games, but if you look at how they performed in those losses, they came by an average of 15 points each. And just for comparison's sake, in the rest of the SEC, only 3 teams had a worse scoring margin in their losses last year: Mississippi State, Auburn, and LSU. But the thing is, Mississippi State lost 2 more games. Auburn and LSU lost 3 more games. Arkansas, with only 4 losses, had a worse scoring margin. And that, to me, says maybe you weren't as good as your record suggests. So I think there's going to be, considering what they lost, considering defensively they play a whole hell of a lot of bend but don't break, and they did very well in the red zone last year. Will they be able to maintain the kind of success they had there? I think this is a bowl team, but I think we're going to see a drop-off in the record. I've got them going 6-6, so I'm going on the under.
I am mathematically on the under here, but I will note that you should only be playing the over at Caesars. Okay. 7 minus 120 or minus 110 is by far the lowest number in the market that I see on my screen. And I've got about 12 books pulled up. Now, some of them I think are cloned because they look really similar. Whereas other books, like Tom, that meme up there again, they have under 7.5 minus 145 other spots. So if you want the over, bet it with our sponsor. If you want the under, don't give up a free half win for 30 more cents of juice. So betting advisory there. Like I will probably have a lock on this. It's not going to be at the Caesars number. But
The
Caesars
Bowser
number
Sportsbook?
it's off market. Yeah, Bowser Sportsbook, correct. The Caesars number to the over is a little bit off market, and I think is maybe value if you like this team more than I do. I'm worried about the loss of Burks. Tom already hit that really hard.
What about Hazelwood? Does he finally click? That's an old
I'd love
Barton
him to.
Simmons, like, you've loved him. Barton's loved him.
Yeah.
Ever since this guy's been in high school, we've been waiting for Hazelwood to just like explode onto the scene. And I would think that when we look at the Kendall Briles offense, it's like, well, this should be a good opportunity for him to step into that role, get a ton of targets, and finally, end this season looking like an NFL receiver.
I agree with you on that. Like that if they go over, that will be one of the keys. The guy I'm most worried about them losing actually is John Ridgeway. So they play that drop 8 stuff with a 3-man front, and they play it really well. I think Barry Odom's an awesome DC because he just understands the personnel they have and doesn't ask them to do things they cannot do. But there is a personnel element to what they've done. And part of that was having John Ridgeway be a disruptor in the middle, be a true 2-gap guy. And look, they've had to replace a guy like that 2 out of the last 3 years. Maybe they will do so again successfully and have a really good one in the wings. I'm not super confident they have a guy as good as John Ridgeway. That was a hell of a college football player. They also lose a ton of experience in the secondary, guys who knew how to play Barry's defense in the back end. I'm not a huge believer that KJ Jefferson is like an awesome NFL prospect or anything like that, but in that offense, they run that Briles stuff. They're going to score some points. Can they score enough points if the defense, slips a little bit? I had them as like a top 20 defense last year. If they're merely like a top 30 defense, I could see them going 6-6, but I'm not betting under 7. So for me, for show pick purposes, give me the over 7.
Yeah.
So I'm the low man on the Hogs. What the hell's
Oh,
happening?
Danny.
Oh,
We're probably both low.
Where you at, Danny?
Oh, I'm on what I gave it already,
Danny's
didn't
on
I?
the over.
I'm on
Yeah,
the
Danny's
over.
on the over.
I'm on the over. Yeah. Double check.
Oh.
I'm like, what did I just give? I'm like,
A name to know for DFS, kid named Rocket Sanders, Raheem Sanders, good 2-way player in high school. Some people like him as a backer. Some people like him as a running back. He's going to start a running back for them, I suspect. And that kid can go. That was like a COVID class kid, if I recall. He's got some real juice to him.